Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions. Every Wednesday from 9 to 10 o'clock, we talk about whatever I want to. So, and whatever you want to. If you want to call in, 220-9788, 220-WSTU. That's the number in the studio. If you want to call and join in on the conversation or have a comment. My name is Mark Breckbell. I'm a local CPA, and also I'm a licensed community association manager and have been more importantly, lived here for a long time, but not forever, just like some people. It's funny. When I look back, I moved here in 1980, moved to Jensen in 1986, and so there's been a lot of changes, a lot of differences in the community, and in what's going on. Many of you that have lived here generationally have had the opportunity to see huge changes in what's going on here locally, and it's kind of neat. I've just in the last 30 or so years had the opportunity to witness some of those changes and some of the good things that have happened to the town. So it's kind of cool. But I was looking at that, and the other day talking to somebody who's been here longer, and it's just amazing what has happened. And of course, I do a lot of stuff with Stuart Main Street, which is a very, very good organization, and does a lot for the city of Stuart, which, by the way, if you're looking to be involved from an advertising standpoint, if you're a business, Stuart Main Street is looking for additional sponsors for Rock and River Walk, and that's a really good program. There's a lot of people that get out there and get to see that between the entertainment every Sunday all year round between 1 and 4 down there at the Riverwalk stage, plus the green market that takes place there every Sunday. It's just an amazing the number of people that you get in front of with your banner or advertising. To me, I think it's been a great source of business for me, and just involvement, just local involvement, which really helps. And that's one of the changes. I remember when I came here in 1986. It was unsafe to go between the walkway from that's near Luna's between Osceola and Flagler, especially at night. There were security issues. Typically, you were waking a couple people up who were sleeping there. It was really not good, and it was a tough time. Even as recently as maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago. I don't remember how long we've been doing Rock and River Walk downtown. It wasn't very busy on a Sunday afternoon. The green market, but some of the shops didn't even bother to open because there weren't enough people. Now, Sundays are the busiest days for a lot of the shops downtown. So, so if you are looking at something there, but it's just amazing some of the things that have happened in the community over the last 30 years that I've been here, and just some of the things that have taken place. So. Make sure you get out. If you're new to the community, get out and take a look around and see what's going on and check it out, because there are a lot of things going on and a lot of things to be able to participate in. And so I would just recommend that you kind of look at that and take a look at what we got here from a community standpoint. And as many of you know, this show is primarily geared towards economics and finance, some of the stuff that's happening and the impact that it might have on you. And we're going to still stay on that a little bit, but and we tend to talk at national and local and international levels and all those kind of things. So I'm not going to tell you what to do in terms of financial planning. It's not a time to buy gold or whatever, or it is a time to buy gold. I don't care. I'm not going to. But if you happen to need to buy gold, you need to talk to Steve at Colorado Pawn. They Colorado Pawn Store. They have some great stuff there, by the way. Hey, Steve, you don't owe me for that. That's a freebie. But anyway, no. Seriously though, it's interesting. Speaking of that subject, you say, well, let's finance, and I a lot of people don't understand how the pawn business works, and the reason I'm talking about this is not because you all need to go out and pawn stuff necessarily, but one aspect of pawn is loans, and it's financing. And it's funny that still and I think the economy's gotten a little better, but in the pawn business, uh, there's a couple alternatives. You can sell stuff directly to the store and get cash, and some people do that. They have old items that they don't need anymore, don't want anymore. Maybe it's old jewelry or old, just whatever, and they decide to, just get rid of it. And it's an easy way to get it because that those businesses are in the business of buying items like that, estate items, and all those kind of things. But the but probably, a big portion of the business, 60-70% of the business is actually loans. What people go there and they borrow against things, and then they um, and then they come back in and pick them up, in a few days or whatever, or in a month, and they pay a fee for that. Uh, and that fees, I mean, it's kind of high, but when you don't have any money, how high is too high? I mean, you can't. I know some people claim, oh, that's unfair, but the fact of the matter is, there are a number of people in our community that live paycheck to paycheck, and so when something happens that's unexpected, and if they're not lucky enough to have parents or grandparents or somebody that can help them out, they have no choice. So if they're in a situation where they they need the money, they go down and they take out a loan, and the only thing they may have as collateral is their drill, or whatever it is that they may happen to have. And I guess that's kind of a sad state of affairs, but that kind of is where the country has always been. I mean, there's always those that live for whatever reason, and we try to keep that safety net in place to protect those people. But for whatever reason, and sometimes it's drug issues and alcohol issues. Sometimes just it's just bad luck. It's just something that happens. Maybe somebody doesn't have the support system. They're out on their own, and they break a leg and they can't work for a number of weeks. At that point, you don't need your drill, and you don't need you don't need all those tools because you can't work, but you also can't work. So you pawn it, get some money, and then hopefully once you've recovered, you pay that back, and you get your tools back and go back to work. But it is the case. I mean, it still is, and it's also a case that for many, many people, uh, there are not conventional ways to borrow money. For example, many of us that maybe have been more fortunate or a little better off, if that happens to us and we don't have cash in the bank, we may have a credit card. We may be able to go down, borrow some money from the bank, do whatever. But ultimately, for many, they don't have that choice. And from a financing standpoint, frankly, it's getting harder and harder to borrow from the banks. They're not local anymore. Generally, they're not. And they're and it's getting harder and harder to borrow from them. They all have very specific things that they'll do, but most things they won't. So, and now interest rates have gone up. I saw something recently that uh, was talking about housing prices, and they mentioned that housing prices had dipped in December, and so everybody's freaking out and going crazy. And a lot of I know there's some people, some realtors and others that are saying, "Oh, the market's turning." It's funny, and I'm not gonna. I mean, the real estate people make a living off of doing what they're doing, and so certainly they know how to sell homes. But sometimes I don't know that they all understand, the economics of what's going on with selling homes. Just because prices go down doesn't mean that we're looking at another recession. Um, it may actually be a good thing, um, and maybe what we need when prices were going up and up and up, and they were going up crazy. People weren't as worried about that, but they should have been because the prices were well beyond what the economic value of a house was. And by the way, there is an economic value of a house. We just don't calculate it um, in the process. We just don't calculate it. Uh, your house is always worth a factor of what you can rent it for. So if you really want to know if your house is overpriced, go take a look at what you could get in rent or in projected rent. Take away expenses like your real estate taxes and your property insurance or whatever, and then basically divide that by 8%. And and when you do that, that'll give you a rough idea what the fair market value of your house should be, based on what's called an income approach. They use that calculation on the commercial side. So if you were buying a commercial building, that's one of the ways they appraise it. There are, basically three ways that a commercial property is appraised. Two of them are exactly the same as residential, and the third one is this income approach. They're all appraised based on replacement cost, which almost never comes into play. And then they're always appraised based on comparable value. That's other sales. All right. So that means if you can find two fools that are overpaying for their house, you now can overpay for your house because you've got a couple of appraisals where they overpaid. But it doesn't mean that's the value of your house. But in the residential area, that's all you need. If we can get a few people to get nuts and overpay for something, all of a sudden everybody can overpay for stuff because they can borrow money to do it. But it doesn't mean the property is there. And if you go back and look at where the market collapsed in 2007, when you look, because that's when it actually collapsed in 2007, it was strong through 2005, 2006. It was normal in 2004. It was below market in 2003. But if you go back and look and see where the market collapsed, you'll look and see that it was about at that point that it was a point that you were paying substantially more for your house in a mortgage payment than you could lease it out for. So you were not covering anything. I mean, it was crazy, the value. And even if you had even if you had a low interest rate, it still wasn't making sense. And so what happened is that that's when the market overheated, and it was because it got disconnected from what the economic value of the house is. There's an intrinsic value to a home. There's an emotional value to a home. I always wanted this type of home. I mean, I've got a home that is right now, it was built in 1927. From a pure construction standpoint, there's no way in the world anybody would pay the price that they wouldn't even pay land price for from what my house is worth right now. But it'll appraise out, and it does. And there are people who would pay more than it's worth because they like the idea of living in a 1927 house that's in downtown Stuart. There are not many of those that are a block off downtown. So, so at that point, you get more money. There's some emotional value to the property beyond the economic value. But the fact of the matter is, the economic value really is where, tells you what the price is. Now, the fact that I have an apartment on the property and the house on the property and could lease both of those out, it makes my economic value higher. So that's why, to some degree, and because lease rates are higher in Stuart and I can, get more money for it, it makes it more valuable. So realistically, as an investment, it's probably closer to what somebody would pay than it should be because of the fact that it's got such economic value from the potential to lease it or Airbnb it or whatever I want to do with it. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at. So people, were freaking out in December because prices went down. And first of all, I always like that because they talk about prices, and there are two ways to value pricing when they talk about prices in real estate. There's the average value, and then there's the median value. Most of the time, they're talking about the median value. A lot of times that's what they talk, but they flip back and forth. And those are two completely different things. Let me explain what it is. If I have 5 houses and they're all $100,000 a piece, then if I take 5 times 100, it's 500,000, and I divide that by 5, the average price is $100,000 a house. So the average sales price this month was $100,000. Okay, and that would be the deal. Now, if on the other hand, I had those same 5 houses, all right, I had those same 5 houses, but let's say that 3 of them were at 75,000 a piece, and the other 2 were at well, I can kind of make this work out, but let's say about 112.50. So if I add all those up, I still have 500,000, and I divide by 5, the average price is $100,000. But the median price is going to be 75,000 in that scenario, because you take of the 5 sales, there's 3 at 75 and 2 at 112.50. So you take the one that's in the middle, the median, that there are equal numbers higher and equal numbers lower of not dollar amounts, but number of units. Now all of a sudden, 75,000 is the median price. So you can see what happens. I could have done that example the other way around and had it so that there were, I could have had, let's say, one house at 400,000, and and then I have another house at 300,000, and then I have a couple houses down at 50. If I do something like that, the median price could be 300 at that point, but the average price could be higher, or but I guess what I'm saying is, depending upon the mix of sales in a month, the housing prices could be higher or they could be lower on a median basis. If all of a sudden in a month, all of the houses that are being sold are higher end homes, then the median price is going to go up. If the mix changes from, if all of a sudden it was lower homes, that median might go down. So you got to look at how that mix changes. On a median value, the mix changes from time to time. And there, especially in Martin County, where you can have a situation where we have a number of houses that, depending upon what the sweet spot is, our housing prices can be higher because we get a shift. All of a sudden we sell a few large homes in the market, and then there's not many other sales. And that's what you have to look for as well, is that right now, over the last probably 12 months at least, in Martin County, we've had what's called a thin market. In other words, there's not much inventory for sale. There's not a lot of people that are putting their homes on the market. And so as a result, if you have fewer sellers and equal or more buyers, and you got a number of buyers, you're going to have the price go up, because there's limited amounts of homes to buy, and the buyers are going to pay more because they want a house, and there's not that many to choose from. So we've had a thin market that has caused prices to go up because of the fact that there was not a lot of inventory for sale. Interestingly enough, in my opinion, the reason that some of that was happening is that we cleared out a lot of that old inventory that was foreclosed on, that was short sales, that were lower priced. We closed a lot of that inventory off the market. Those things got sold out because the market came back enough to get rid of some of those. But what's happened is that in certain pockets, particularly in places in Martin County, the housing prices aren't back yet to the peak at 2006. And so if somebody ended up borrowing money and buying at the peak in 2006, or and there's costs associated with it because it got repossessed, or it's or there's fees and costs associated with it that the person that owns it, that they might be paying on it now because they've got a job, but they're trying to get rid of it because it's too expensive, and the market might not be there yet after they sell it, taking into consideration commissions and things. They're not ready to put it on the market yet. But what's happening is, occasionally as those are being sold, they're coming back to the market. As those prices are going up, they're coming back to the market, they're being sold, and those people are getting out of that debt without having to file bankruptcy, without having the foreclosure issues. We've got some of that clearing out of the market finally. You can see that in the paper when you look and see that, when the house was purchased and when the house was sold and what prices it sold at. And, you can see that they're just about break even, or in some cases slightly less than the 2006 price, or sometimes a little bit more. We also have some stuff that's coming back on the market. It's coming on the market that was bought out in 2011 or 2009 at discounted prices. They held it, fixed it up, maybe rented it for a little while, and now are pushing it out on the market, making their money on it. Some of those came to market over the last year, but not a lot. That was selective because the rents were so good. You could sit there and hold that property. You had a tenant. You didn't want to sell it right away. So that's what was happening. But what's happened in December, I think, and it bears it out based on the numbers I've looked at, is that not that the housing prices have overheated to the point that people won't pay the price. What's happening is that in the market that we're talking about, which is generally that range between 250 or 70 or 80,000 and maybe 400, that range, people were stretching to buy those homes, and they could do it because interest rates were low. So you go in, and if interest rates are 4%, I can afford a lot more in home at 4% than I can at 5%. And in fact, if I was stretching at 4% to get into that home, and the interest rates go up 1%, I probably don't qualify for that home now. In fact, there's a number of people that have bought homes in the last 24 months or 36 months who couldn't buy the same home today with the same income and the same thing because interest rates are higher. So interest rates make a huge difference. It affects principal. If you look at it from the standpoint of bonds, if I own a treasury bond, a 10-year treasury bond, and a note, and interest rates go up 0.1% on that bond, the value of the external rates, not the rates that they're paying me, but the interest rates themselves go up 0.1 point on that bond. And that bond I had was at the market rates at the time I bought it. It's going to decrease the value of that bond by 10%, about 1/8 on a 10-year deal. Probably about a 12-year deal. It reduces the value of the bond. If you were to sell it, you would lose 10%. About every 1/8%, you've got a point. So you can figure out that if you're going, if you're going to lose, you're going to lose a lot on a percentage basis if interest rates start going up. It can cost you a lot of money. Ask the mortgage industry a number of years ago when interest rates rose and they had mortgages that they had not sold off, and they had fixed rate mortgages. It put large billion-dollar mortgage companies out of business instantaneously because they lost, and interest rates only went up about 1%, and they were losing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So that is what I think is happening in December. In other words, to get a house sold now, if the person has to qualify for a mortgage, you're having to drop that price a little bit. It may be intentional. The buyer says, I can't qualify. So you say, okay, I'm going to drop the price. It may be there's not as many buyers out there because now there's not as many people that can qualify, so you have to drop the price. But the bottom line is that the reduction in price that it's occurring right now is as a result of interest rates. And that's not that doesn't mean that that house is worth less. You see what I'm getting at? It hasn't changed unless the house now leases for less or is worth less from an economic standpoint because you could get less revenue off of it. If at the same time interest rates are going up, you had lease rates going down, fewer people were leasing their homes and the rates are down. I mean, more people leasing their homes and the rates are down, then yeah, that might indicate that there's a true loss of value. But the value that we're losing in the market, so to speak, right now, I think, is solely as a result of interest rates. It's a long-term value adjustment because they're saying if you pay these interest rates long-term, the house is worth less. It's less as an investment because your costs are higher, and therefore it doesn't produce as much of an economic return to you. And that's, it's valid to consider that, but in my opinion, it could change tomorrow if interest rates went back down. Now, here's the problem. We've probably experienced the lowest interest rates that we're ever going to experience in history for any long period of time. I mean, we're way below historical rates, historical averages. And if you've been way below for a long time, it means at some point you got to be way above for some period of time, because you got to bring those rates up. So you either got to be way, way above for a short period of time, or you've got to be an equal amount above for a long period of time. So if our interest rates at 4% are, roughly 3 or 4% less than the average, then we're going to have to see 8% interest rates, or actually closer to 9 or 10% interest rates to make up for that for a long period of time. And many of us remember that interest rates were that high. So, does it mean that we might have an impact on real estate? Absolutely. Because if at some point interest rates do go up to that level, you're going to have, your house is going to become less affordable, fewer buyers at that price range. Fewer buyers means that you're going to have a lower price. So it does mean that you could have a reduction in the value of your home if you had to sell it. So the question you have to ask yourself right now, if you're buying in this market with potential rising interest rates, is how long can I afford to hold that house? And so the answer to that might be, well, at these lease rates, I can afford to hold it for a long, long time. So then you got to say, well, are those lease rates going to stay? But yeah, if people can't afford to buy houses, more people are going to lease. So there are going to be a lot more people out there leasing because there'll be a lot fewer people that can afford to buy. I actually think that we've had a little bit of a permanent shift in the market, in that I think that the younger people are not as eager to own homes. They would rather rent them. Just like the young people are not eager to buy cars, they would rather Uber them. I think that in general, the young people have gotten more conservative. They don't think they need to have home ownership and all of those kind of things. And as a result, they're willing to pay a little more to rent, not a lot more, but they're willing to pay a little more to rent than to buy. So if all of a sudden the only alternative is to rent, because the cost of buying is now higher. I mean, right now, let's face it, you can buy a house with where interest rates are. You can buy a house and it's cheaper than renting that house. So if you thought you were going to be in a home for the next 15 years or 13 years or whatever, long term, you're much better off buying that home and building up equity and paying less than renting that home for the next 15 years. But if, on the other hand, you're not sure you're going to be here, you're not sure you're going to have a job, you're not sure you can afford it, then all of those kind of things that you may have to dump it. Then you may say, for the peace of mind that I don't have to worry about losing, tens of thousands of dollars, I'm going to go ahead and continue to rent, even though I'm paying $500 more a month or $300 more a month than I would be paying normally. Or maybe you're, 25 years old and you're looking at it going, hey, you know what? I always wanted to live in downtown Stewart. I don't have any kids yet. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to do this for a while. I can't afford to buy it, but I'm going to rent it. So like I said, I feel like we may have had a somewhat permanent shift in the buying in the buyers, and that there's a lot of delayed purchases and those kind of things. Which anytime you delay a big group of people who would normally buy, you're going to reduce prices. So, but I think that the price drop we had in December is solely a factor of interest rates. It's solely a factor that interest rates have gone up, and the houses have become less affordable for some people, particularly the people that were stretching to get into that price range. And there's always a percentage of the market that's stretching to get into the price range. They're always stretching to purchase at the highest level that they can. I remember years and years ago, particularly here in Florida, that you used to hear a couple things. One was you should buy a house that's at least the maximum that you can afford. And if you can somehow buy one that's more than the maximum that you can afford, you should go ahead and do that because, and here was the second part of the statement, nobody ever loses money on real estate in Florida. I heard that from bankers, by the way, when I came down here as a banker. Oh, yeah. Real estate's good. Nobody ever loses money on real estate in Florida. What about the condos? Well, we had that one little deal, but that's never going to happen. Nah, never happens. You can always make money on real estate in Florida. Okay. Well, that myth got debunked pretty quickly back in 2007. So now I think we're having somewhat of an overreaction to that too. A lot of people that grew up in Florida were brought up under the concept, particularly people who've been here generations, all they saw was prices go up generally. And so, all of a sudden you've got people thinking, gee, maybe that's too big of an investment for me. Maybe I should get out of this now when I can get out of it and make some money. So we've kind of got some stuff going on, but the December, I don't think personally that that's a reason to be afraid of residential real estate. I don't think it is. And the reason for that is that there's other economic numbers that makes me feel comfortable with that. First of all, the jobs numbers are up. Even though locally here, we had really good numbers anyway. They were a little flat, but they're always seasonally adjusted at this time. And the numbers are still strong enough to substantiate and support jobs in the economy. So we're creating jobs in the economy. So people have work. That's one of the factors. People aren't going to be unemployed that they can't afford to pay or rent property or pay the price. So we've got that going for us, and that's strong. The house itself doesn't change what its value really is on an income approach. Because frankly, the fact that the rates went up a little bit increased your cost, and there's some give in the rental market still right now because the person that's renting doesn't have as good of an alternative. I mean, frankly, when the interest rates were lower this last year and the market and the job market started picking back up again, that's actually when you had the risk that you would have a problem from an economic standpoint because rentals were starting to get to the point that they were too high compared to purchases. People could borrow money at those interest rates with no money down. And trust me, people, they're out there. Those loans on residential, believe it or not, the big Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, government agencies now, they're still loaning money on a ridiculous basis. But as interest rates go up, they require somebody have better credit, more cash, more down, things like that, which does force some of the buyers out. So, but previously, with interest rates the way they were, you could go borrow 90, 95% on a primary residence. You may or may not have PMI, and you could get that done. And if your credit score was good, and then you could buy that house with probably what was the equivalent of first, last, and security down. So for what you would have to pay to rent a house, you were able to buy a house. So there was that thought process there, and some people decided, hey, this is crazy. I'm paying $2,500 a month to rent this house, and it would cost me $1,600 to buy it. So they bought it, and that's what they did. But now that alternative isn't there because they might be able to do it, but now they're going to have 10% down because the banks are concerned because of the payment being higher. So they want 10% down or 20% down. So when that happens and people are putting more cash down, they either want a lower price because they're paying more in cash, and so it's more assured that they're going to buy the property and be able to qualify, or you're going to have to reduce the price because they can't qualify. Either way, that's going to be a factor. So ironically, if interest rates went down again, people would actually have a harder time borrowing the money because the comps will be down from this period because of the interest rates. And so, when people should buy, when the interest rates go down again, they'll actually probably have a harder time buying because they won't have the comps, because from an appraisal standpoint, the appraisal market will say that house is worth less because the homes in the last 6 months sold for less. But they don't factor in the income approach. They don't factor in the cost associated with the rising interest rates. It's assumed that that's built into the comp and that it's still the same going forward. And that might not be the case. That might not be the same. So what I guess I'm getting at is that value of the home is based on largely what it can be rented for, not necessarily what it can, what its cost is. And so therefore, if the rental value of a house, the economic value of a home, has stayed the same or gone up a little bit because of interest rates, but the price of a house has gone down, it actually might be a good time to buy because depending upon how much you're going to borrow and what you're going to do, you might actually be getting a house a little cheaper than it is worth. Than it's really worth because of interest rates and comps. Whereas the economic value of the house hasn't changed. But most people don't think about the economic value. A lot of times it's an intrinsic thing, and they think about what they really want to do, and I love this house and I love the view and all of that. And and I know, the realtors think about that. They stage it so that, people say, "Oh, gee, I just love that little cubby over there. That's beautiful." My first question is, what's this place leased for? So, so I'm kind of weird that way, but it is a factor. You should know because it is an investment, and you may ignore it, but you should know going in what that economic value is. You should do an income approach on that residential property to determine what the cap rate is and what the cap value is, what the capitalized value is, if you were to capitalize that income stream. That's what the cap rate is. That's what you're looking to do. And, frankly, it fluctuates around, but historically, if you use an 8% cap rate on commercial, that's always been the case. If you use something like that, the interest, it can fluctuate up and down. It might be a little lower at some point, a little higher at other points, but it'll give you a rough idea where the house is at, and you can determine how much you're overpaying. You will find that that in general, using that method, the income approach, almost all residential property isn't going to end up being priced as high as it would on a comp basis, because there are always two fools that can get together in the same 6-month period and overpay. And so, so you can sometimes you end up getting prices that don't justify the economic reality of what that house is worth, because people don't buy their homes as investments generally. They buy them as a place that they want to live and raise their family and all that, which is great. So there's some intrinsic value there that is not factored into a pure economic calculation, but you should do that economic calculation. And I think, if you look at that and keep an eye on that, then when you look at things like what happened last month or the month before in December, in the market, you won't be as concerned, or at least you'll know why. And then you can decide whether you're concerned or not. Am I concerned that interest rates are going up and that historically I still probably have a problem with it right now because let's face it, we're going to see a relatively depressed price if interest rates go up and stay there. And since we're at historically low prices, or a lot closer to the historic low than the historic high, um, there's not many places for rates to go but up. And so if you had a few $100,000 in your investment portfolio, in your retirement portfolio, is your investment advisor right now suggesting that you buy all bonds, not have any money in the stock market? I doubt that, because most people are thinking that bonds, they tend to stabilize your investments because the principal eventually gets paid back, but, on a bond. So you can write it out and get your principal back. But the bottom line is that you, ultimately, most people aren't buying large amounts of bonds right now because they're worried about rising interest rates, the Fed adjustments and all of that kind of thing. They're worried about interest rates going up. Well, if that hits long-term rates, which Fed adjustments typically affect the short end, but the idea behind them is to influence the long end. And if that happens and we start getting a large increase in long-term rates, including mortgage rates, then the value of properties as appraised values, the amount that can be financed, will go down because people won't be able to afford as big a house. Fewer buyers, lower price. That's just the way it works economically. So as those interest rates tick up and we eliminate buyers from that market, you're going to have an impact on price as far as appraisal. Again, if from a long-term standpoint, if you can hold it, you probably haven't lost anything long-term. So if that house works for you, it's what you want, and it's gonna and it works out. It's going to cost you a little more if interest rates are higher, but if interest rates go up after you've bought and they stay up for a few years and you're not going anywhere, it's not going to affect you, because if they eventually come down, and here's the example. Let's say you bought a house in 2005, 2000, maybe even early 2006. And now you had a job and you could afford to make the payment. You had a fixed rate mortgage, or you refinanced and were able to get a low mortgage. You're able to make the payment. You didn't have to go anywhere. Your job was stable, and it's now 2019 and you put that house up for sale. You're going to get this, at least what you paid for it and more. So you, in effect, got your money back. You may not have got all the interest you paid back, but you got your money back. And that's what I'm saying. If you have to look at a home as either a long-term investment, or you have to look at it from the income approach. But either way, you've got to look at it. That's why I say the bond prices end up being more stable, because there's always the idea that at the end, I'm going to get paid back. I'm going to get my principal paid back, so I won't lose anything. Well, in a house, if you hold it long enough, that same thing's probably going to be true. You get the house paid off, you hold the house long enough, if it's in your estate when you die, it's probably going to be selling for more than what you paid for it, and your kids will be happy. So, but we kind of look at that, and sometimes we panic. I mean, we just panic, and we cause prices to change because now we're so afraid of 2007. And I tell you that, I understand it. If I was a realtor in 2005 and 6, and then was a realtor in 2007, 8, 9, and then of course after that, I'm not a realtor because I'm unemployed, because you weren't selling anything. Unless you worked for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and you were selling foreclosures, I would be worried if the market was changing. I'd start looking at, maybe I should do something different. Maybe I should start doing, more rentals, or maybe whatever. Maybe I would start looking at some of that, but I don't think that's where we're at. We have to look at the market from that standpoint and say, do we have a fundamentally changed market? I think that, we don't from that standpoint. I think we've got a reduction because of interest rates. And I think they're probably going to stay there for a while. And if interest rates go up further, we're going to see further reduction. But it doesn't mean that the market is overheated. It just means that interest rates allowed people to buy, and we had more buyers for a short period of time. That doesn't mean that they were paying an unreasonable price. It just means that they could stretch and afford. And we had more buyers, and it was a reasonable price at that time. So, whereas, as we know, in 2006, we had people dropping $75,000 down as a deposit on something without any idea of what that house was going to be worth, and without it even being built, just because they could flip it. We had people that flipped it. We had people that, up there in Fort Pierce out there when, I guess it was Berg, not DeVosta, built those houses on the intercoastal out there. What's it called? Harbridge or whatever. What's that? Not Harbridge. What's the one up there in Harbor something or another? That's right there on as you're going out to the island between Fort Pierce and
I'm not sure.
They built it on an old trailer park.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, which is a great community. And if anybody knew Berg, that's why they bought, because they know his homes. Always, he sells them cheap because he takes all the advertising prices out of them, all the advertising cost out of it, and assumes he's going to sell it day one, which he did. But if you remember, he sold out the day they went on sale, not the day that they were finished. The day they went on sale, he sold out. You had to put a deposit down, and you did it by lottery. And people went in there, and I could kick myself because it was a Saturday in season. I should have taken the Saturday off, even though I had taxes to do, and should have sat in line. Because I know people that sat in line and for that lottery and got a good number and turned around and sold their lottery ticket for 10 grand and 15 grand and 20 grand. In fact, if your number was low enough, it determined where you got to select. So the people that got low enough to be able to select the upper floor units looking right up the river, on the river, those were $500,000 houses that were being sold for way, 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 way less than that. And it was a good deal. And I know people who stood in line, got their ticket, and turned around and sold it in line for thousands of dollars. So that's kind of crazy stuff. But those are the kind of things that were happening. People were just paying for the opportunity because they knew that they could flip it. The last thing in the world I needed was a house up there on the intercoastal in Fort Pierce, because I don't work up there or live up there. But I knew that they'd be worth something and you could get your money back, and a lot of people did. So, we don't have that kind of thing. We don't have people that are substantially overpaying. Frankly, that's at the high end of the market. At the high end of the market, people don't worry about they don't worry about what the unit costs. They really don't. That's why the dollars per square foot, the price per square foot in Palm Beach is through the roof. It's well over $1,000, I think, a square foot down there. In the Keys, if you've got a house that doesn't need repairs, way, way up there in terms of price. Why? Because it's not about price. It's about where you are. It's about location. It's about the ambiance. It's the intrinsic value. It's all of those kind of things that people, if they have money, can afford to overpay for. And, truthfully, in Palm Beach, there are well more than two people who are stupid enough to overpay for a house. So as a result, the prices are really high on a comp basis there too. But, trust me, these are people that, go in and buy a $3 million, 1,500 square foot condo or 2,000 square foot condo, and then tear it all up inside and put another $1 million in it. Because they want it exactly the way they want it. And it's kind of amazing, but that's what happens. And so that's when you're talking about a market you got to be careful of. And if you've got the money that you can afford it, then you don't need to worry about it. And so that's why they don't worry about it. And frankly, that's why they get their money back, because they can hold it as long as they want. Most of them don't have loans on it. Some do, but most of them don't. And if they do, they can afford to pay the loans. And so they don't have to sell. So if they get tired of it, they remodel it again and make it look different. Or they decide they're not coming to Palm Beach, or they sell it to one of their friends. So who's also stupid enough to pay that kind of money. So it's one of those kind of things where, there are things you got to watch out for. And, and those are kind of things, but I wouldn't panic based on December and January's numbers, because we've had an increase in interest rates. And as interest rates go up, we probably will continue to see a tick down in the value of homes from a cost standpoint, because people will need to reduce price to get the same number of people who can afford to buy. Otherwise, you're going to freeze those people out. So doesn't necessarily mean the house is worth less. Watch those rental values. When you start seeing those rental values going down, then you need to worry a little bit, because that's going to be a permanent reduction in the price, at least in the near term. So anyway, well, I was kind of rambling today, but I thought it was something that was interesting. I wanted to bring it up and talk about it. I'll be back again next Wednesday right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We're Martin County's Heritage Station.